Well, just as Richard and Jerry were talking about one of New York's greatest assets, our public spaces, we're going to turn now to another of New York City's greatest assets, our NYCHA housing. It's impossible, really, to consider a globally competitive New York City without addressing the need to provide diverse, vibrant housing options for residents of all income levels. As Mayor Bloomberg's Plan NYC 2030 outlines, in less than 2 decades, we expect the city to be able to house at least 1 million more residents. And with that growth, we need to ensure that our communities can adjust to change in ways that strengthen neighborhoods and improve the lives of all residents. Public housing is vital to this mix, both economically and socially. MAS is proud to have been working with the Brownsville Partnership and Community Solutions, founded by Roseanne Haggerty, who we've heard from, to develop a community-driven plan for Brownsville, Brooklyn, a neighborhood with the highest concentration of public housing in the United States. MAS continues to work with the partnership to develop creative ways to build upon the neighborhood's assets, to explore ways to strengthen the land use planning and critical infrastructure connections that contribute to this neighborhood's livability and resilience. Critical to the revitalization effort of Brownsville, along with many other neighborhoods around the city, is the New York City Housing Authority. The largest public housing authority in the United States, NYCHA provides housing for 620,000 residents of New York City, 1 out of every 8 renters in New York City, or the 11th largest of the nation's cities, as Eddie Torres highlighted this morning. NYCHA not only provides housing, it provides community and educational programs, employment and training initiatives, and much more. I'm delighted to welcome 2 members of the NYCHA team, Sideya Sherman, who's director of the Office of Resident Economic Empowerment and Sustainability, and we're proud, a former MAS staff member, and then Fred Harris, who's executive vice president for real estate development. Fred brings to that position a wide range of experience, having been involved in everything from building housing in South Africa after apartheid ended, to building some of the most creative supportive housing in the city that we have. Sideya and Fred are going to talk to us about the efforts within the agency to introduce new approaches to strengthen NYCHA and this critical civic asset. We all know that NYCHA took a beating during Sandy. They're still struggling to repair and rebuild and address the myriad of challenges that they face, even before Sandy. And with NYCHA's funding slipping, we have to ask some hard questions about how the city should invest in this critical resource. How can economic opportunities for NYCHA residents be enhanced? Sideya and Fred will present some of the innovative ideas for maintaining a diverse, robust housing stock and the new ways that they are approaching those obstacles. So please join me in welcoming Sideya Sherman, who will then be followed by Fred Harris. Sideya?
Hi, good afternoon. So my name is Sideya Sherman, and thank you, Vicki, for that introduction, and thank you to the Municipal Art Society for having me here today. I'm going to briefly speak to you about NYCHA's zone model, or our new approach to expanding economic opportunity to public housing residents. As Vicki mentioned, NYCHA is really a city within a city. We serve over 500,000 New Yorkers. We contribute about $6 billion in economic output throughout the city and our local economy in the city and the state annually. And preserving public housing is really vital to the economic and social fabric of New York. So when you look at the population of public housing, there's a high proportion of young people. We have a number of seniors who are aging in place. We have a high volume of female-headed households, about 77% of our households. About 47% of NYCHA residents are working families, and the average income is around $23,000. NYCHA households really contribute to the economic diversity of this city. Many NYCHA residents work in the sectors and in the fields that really are the backbone of New York. About 31% of residents work in the healthcare and the social service sector, followed by retail, education, public administration. Some of our largest employers are NYCHA, Department of Education, the NYPD, for instance. So while we see that NYCHA really houses a lot of the New Yorkers who are performing the critical jobs and functions that are necessary to our city, there's also a high volume of unemployment and disproportionate number of people who are disconnected from social and economic services. So this is significant when you think about the fact that NYCHA residents often disproportionately represent the New Yorkers who need economic opportunity services. And traditionally, we've seen that there have been low to moderate levels of participation in the city's workforce system. When you think about the city's workforce system, you're really talking about an over $500 million system that includes city, state, federal resources that are directed to the city agencies whose missions it is to provide these services, as well as private and nonprofit partners. This is significant because within NYCHA, as Vicki mentioned, we have a number of fiscal constraints and shrinking resources and no dedicated funding streams to really support resident services directly. So to address this, the agency has really taken an unprecedented approach to thinking more critically about how we can leverage some of our non-financial assets to expand economic opportunity to public housing residents. In this context, the agency really began to transition from providing direct employment assistance services to service coordination and creating a model that leverages NYCHA as a platform where other partners, other sister city agencies, private organizations and philanthropies are really able to work with NYCHA strategically to expand economic opportunity for public housing communities. In doing so, we recognize that NYCHA is a stakeholder in New York City's economic ecosystem, but we are one stakeholder with unique assets to leverage. So when you think about the assets that NYCHA has at its disposal, one of the most obvious ones is space. We obviously are a landlord, and we have a lot of space that we can leverage for our partners or to do creative things such as incubate a resident-owned business, for instance. We also have customer communication channels and touch points and thousands of staff that we employ on the front line who directly connect with residents on a daily basis. In addition to that, we have the ability to make and enforce policy. So NYCHA is able to enforce policies such as the Earned Income Disallowance, which is a rent incentive that really makes work pay and helps residents ease into higher rents when they've seen increases in their income. In addition to that, we have access to data that can drive decision-making and inform policy. And we also are a direct employer and a consumer. In order to make these assets valuable to partners who provide these services directly, we've packaged them into what we've called the zone model, where we've essentially segregated and divided the city into 15 geographic zones, each zone serving around 10,000 public housing households. Within each zone, we've crafted strategic projects that leverage the best of our assets to the benefit of our partners and invited these partners to apply through a competitive process to work with NYCHA to execute local projects. These partners are workforce development providers, they're financial counselors, they're credit unions, they're adult education providers, and they're working in this neighborhood-based context to execute projects that achieve clearly defined outcomes. So an example of a project would be filling an entire vocational training class with all NYCHA residents, for instance, or working with a credit union to become a remote capture payment site and using that opportunity to really connect unbanked residents to more mainstream financial products and services. So in this context, there are 4 key ways in which we define success. We understand that there are the outcomes that NYCHA controls, and there are the outcomes that our partners control who are delivering the services directly. So our first and primary method for defining success is really our ability to connect residents to services. We found a number of ways to do this, one of which is a web-based referral system that we've recently piloted at 73 developments throughout the city, where we've really been able to use technology as a tool to seize key moments that frontline NYCHA staff staffer would have when interacting with a public housing resident. A classic example would be a resident who comes into a property management office to adjust their rent because they've lost employment or they've had their hours cut back. We've used technology as a tool to actually seize that moment to not only perform a rent adjustment, but refer that resident to a qualified provider that's available locally who agrees to engage that resident within 24 to 48 hours of being connected. That system has been piloted at 73 developments throughout the city, and so far we've seen about 1,300 residents connected to services through that method. In addition, we really see our value in supporting providers to actually provide better service to public housing residents. Some of the ways that we've done this is training financial counseling providers to actually understand NYCHA rent rules, policies, and procedures so that they can actually adapt their services to become more relevant to the NYCHA residents that they serve. Another example is really attracting resources to under-resourced communities. So many NYCHA residents and NYCHA communities are in parts of the city that are under-resourced, like Brownsville, for instance, where through a mayoral initiative, we've been able to attract external resources and proven models such as the Jobs Plus program to a number of new NYCHA neighborhoods. And the last way that we really do this is by generating economic opportunity. As I mentioned, NYCHA really is an economic engine, and so we have an opportunity to create jobs, to leverage training in order to ensure that public housing residents are able to access opportunities that lead to long-term career ladders. One of the ways that we've done that is through our NYCHA Resident Training Academy, which is a Robin Hood-funded initiative where we've been able to train NYCHA residents in the construction and pest control and maintenance and janitorial fields to really be employed directly with NYCHA contractors and with other private employers to address the critical repair and maintenance and capital improvement needs that we see throughout the authority. We've had over an 86% job placement rate through that program, and approximately 88% of the people who were employed in the first program year are still working today. So in conclusion, because I know I'm almost over time, this model is really a new approach to how we as a public housing authority can think more creatively about using the resources that we have at our disposal to make them valuable to the partners who provide these services directly. Through this place-based approach, we're essentially executing a number of small-scale and large-scale local projects that respond to neighborhood needs and that are really relevant and bubble up to citywide outcomes. Thank you.